Welcome back to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. I am Stephanie Weidel, and I have the great privilege of interviewing today Brian Lombardi, who is a Customs and Border Protection Officer, as well as a member of the board for Feds for Freedom. Thanks so much for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Why don't you give us a little bit of your history and how you came to question the given narratives?
Well, I would say that, when the mandate came out, I was very against it. It seemed wrong. I'm kind of somebody that doesn't like to be told what to do. I work in the government, so I have to take orders, but at the same time, I don't like being told what to do. And as the kind of coercion and the threats came down, and they kept telling me that I have to get this or I'm going to be fired. And I went back and I was thinking about my career, and I've been in the government for 13 years now, and I've won awards. I've done some good things in my personal experiences within work that have helped people save lives maybe. And they're telling me that I have to get this shot, and if I don't, they're going to fire me. And I just thought it was immediately wrong. Red flags rose up everywhere, and that's when I decided that I just wasn't going to take it, and I was going to take a stand.
So why did you enter the Border Patrol? Because it was the Border Patrol that you first...
Yeah, so my grandpa was a police officer for 31 years in Cleveland. He was kind of my father figure growing up, and so I kind of took after him, learned from him, and wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps. So I initially applied for some local jobs, and at the time there was a lot of people were being laid off at that time, so it was really hard to get in as a new employee with no experience.
And when was that?
About 2008 time, and so I eventually ended up. I think I saw like an advertisement maybe on the back of a Cleveland Indians game on TV. I thought, oh, I'll apply for that. I did. I got approved to go to the academy back in 2008 time, and they actually went on a hiring freeze, and I didn't get in until 2010. And then I started over at Lordsburg Station in New Mexico with Border Patrol. And
is that where you met Marcus Thornton?
Yeah, Marcus and I were classmates in Border Patrol. He actually worked a station over from me in Deming, New Mexico. We both kind of parted ways with Border Patrol at one point or another. I know he did a stint with Air and Marines, and then went over to the State Department, and I moved over to CBP in Las Vegas. And Marcus called me on the phone one day, so that's how it all started.
So what does a Customs and Border Protection Officer do?
We inspect international flights, international cargo, private flights, make sure that no drugs are coming in, make sure that the passengers are admissible, meaning, their intent is, if you're on a visitor's visa, just to come visit, not to work, not to do, something illegal, commit crimes, things of that nature.
So you're dealing with people getting off the flights and wanting to get home as soon as possible.
Yes. Yeah. They're grumpy sometimes, just as we are having to deal with, a couple thousand passengers a day, but we do a good job. So.
Wow. Okay. So what did you start seeing in March of 2020?
Well, a lot of people were just being treated bad. I think there was just this toxicity to life in general that happened. You were walking into a store, people were telling you to get out, people are freaking out about this new virus, and that everybody was afraid of it. And on top of that, you had media and the government feeding that fear as best they could because they wanted to push this new shot, and so it just something changed in people's minds, and humanity kind of went out the window, and it's kind of what led me into the position I'm in now.
So in September of 2021, September 9th, 2021, we had the speech by Biden saying that all federal workers will have the shot. What happened around that time?
For me, I got a call either that day or the next day from Marcus, and he's just asked me a simple question. He's like, what do you think about this mandate? And I was like, I don't like it at all.
And had you kept in contact with Marcus very much?
Maybe on social media. I don't think we were, text or talk like that, but social media. So
Okay, so he asked, "Are you fighting
Yeah,
back in any way?"
yeah. He asked me. Well, he's like, "Well, do you want to do something about it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, yeah." At that time, I think he had Megan Guerrero, who is now our secretary, already on board. And he said, "Well, we're starting a group. We're going to do something about it." I don't think we had any idea what we were going to do at that time. But then, it began a search for law firms. And I'll tell you what, that was very hard because a lot of law firms didn't even want to take our case. And if they did take our case, like Federal Practice Group did and Boyd and Gray and Associates did, they kind of separated themselves from their law firms, I believe, because the law firm didn't really want to have the stigma behind taking on this case. And I know at one point too, there was a major law firm that wanted to take our case really bad, but they didn't want their name on it, and they were going to be working behind the scenes and have a law firm in the Texas area do the work, but they were really going to be the front man, I guess, and they wanted to do all the work behind the scenes, but we were never able to hire them.
Now, has this practice of not wanting to have your name on lawsuits like this, has this continued till now, or are law groups starting to wake up and say, "Oh, actually, this is gaining traction"?
Yeah, I think the tide's turning. I think there's more people opening up. Even the media sometimes has their moments where they actually kind of tell the truth again, and they're like, say, "Hey, this actually isn't working, and here's the data." But I think even people too, a lot of people didn't want to get involved with us as an organization, like even as a member, a volunteer, or a donor, because, at the time, at the very beginning, it was, looked down upon basically, and they felt threatened. They didn't want to get coerced. A lot of people that did get involved, like, Marcus and a lot of the board members ended up, having cases of retaliation or, whatever it might be, that made it even more difficult to be a part of this or this organization. I think people saw that and kind of didn't want to put up with that. They were comfortable that we were taking on the fight, and they just wanted to stay behind the scenes. But I think that's changing a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your particular story. Did you, in the Border Patrol, did you have the same exemption process that we saw in the DOD and the State Department?
Are you talking about to the vaccine?
Yes.
Yeah. So in November 8th was going to be our termination date. And they were being pretty consistent about reminding you about it.
Your termination date?
Yeah, November 8th was going to be our termination date. So they were going to terminate us on November 8th of, I believe it was 2021.
Wow. So for most agencies, we saw they had to get the shot by November 20th something.
Yeah.
But for you, but they had to submit their exemption by then.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
But for you, you would be terminated.
Yeah, well, you could fill out an exemption, and they completely changed the system too, because I believe the way that they did it in the past was, you could ask for a religious or medical exemption at your local port, and then they just kind of changed it, and they built these groups, and they wouldn't even tell you who was a part of these groups and who was adjudicating your exemptions. And honestly, my exemption is still not even adjudicated to this day, like most other people's. And in fact, some of them, they were saying, well, the mandate's not even around anymore, so we're just going to withdraw it, without my consent. And so that's basically kind of what's happening right now. But yeah, if you didn't submit your exemption, you were going to be terminated by November 8th.
And what did you put in your exemption?
Just my personal beliefs. Part of it is a religious belief, and then part of it is a conscientious moral standing. And I think the two are equal, and I believe you're allowed to. Some people aren't religious, right? They might not go to church often. They might not believe in organized religion, but they still have this moral obligation and this moral sense of what is right and wrong, and that's just as valid as a religious exemption.
Mm-hmm. What did you see with your coworkers during that fall? How did they respond to the mandate, and ultimately, did most of them get the shot?
Yeah, so early on, before that November 8th date, I had a lot of people at my office that were coming to me, asking me questions. They kind of had a little bit of an idea of what I was doing, that I had something going on in the background. And they came up and they're like, I'm scared, I don't want to get this shot. I don't think I should have to. I don't want to be fired. But they were just, one common thing was that they were feeling a lot of stress and it was negatively impacting them. And so, one by one email at a time, one coercive email, one coercive message from your supervisor saying, hey, reminder, you need to get this shot on this date or you're going to be fired. And just day by day, people dropped off and, we were left with just a handful of people that actually held out in the end.
And was anyone fired?
In my agency, no. We were lucky enough to, the president actually pushed back that date for whatever reason. They were claiming the holidays, which actually played in our favor because when we filed the lawsuit in December, or Boyd and Gray and Associates did, that nationwide injunction came down in January. And so that pretty much 99% of the federal workforce was covered under that injunction, and we still have it to this day. So I believe the only people that were fired were Veterans Health Affair workers, and then there's a small group of people from the NOAA, like people that were serving on close quarter ships. And the only reason they got terminated was because those agencies had their own specific mandate prior to Biden's mandate.
Did you see anything in the Border Patrol before the COVID mandates came down that seemed like corruption was taking hold?
Yeah, well, I think, what we're seeing is a lot of people do things for the money, that common saying of follow the money. Well, I think a lot of officials were pushing this vaccine and there was no studies on it. There was no data, no efficacy. Like, I think a lot of the studies even that were coming out, who was sponsoring them, who's paying for them, who's studying them. With the mandate itself, it was immoral, right? I think people knew that it was wrong and they had their personal freedoms. And what the government was kind of promoting was this, well, we need to take care of the common good, not my individual well-being. And to me, that's kind of out of the playbook of socialism, right? And because I have my individual rights, nothing supersedes that, not even in a time of emergency. And what we saw is that just kind of being whittled away. And, you have, managers and bosses and all these people that at the time, I think even knew, behind the scenes that what they were being forced to do or being told to do was wrong, was immoral, was unconstitutional, potentially illegal, yet they were still doing it. And they were still telling their employees that, hey, you need to get this shot, you need to get tested before you come into work, you need to wear your mask. And, they knew it was wrong and they still did it anyway. And it's, our obligation in this organization is to do what's right. And sometimes that's standing up and having to bump heads with people. But I do think that was very wrong.
Do you think the supervisors will ever be held accountable?
I hope so. I think that's a goal of a lot of people within this organization, or, basically, I think pretty much all the citizens in this country and probably around the world, that they want to see, people be fired, people go to jail for what they did and what they put people through. Accountability in the government, though, is going to be hard. I think maybe if they go through the courts and we get, like, for example, our EEO cases, if we can get those into federal court in front of a judge, similar to what we did with the mandate case, that potentially we could, get a judge to say, hey, this was wrong, you guys did this, and then maybe accountability comes, potentially reform, something of that nature that will, get us to that, our goal of that.
You all started off the organization as Feds for Medical Freedom. It has now been rebranded into Feds for Freedom, as it is widely said in our group. COVID was only the tip of the iceberg. What were some pivotal moments in the history of Feds for Freedom besides the injunction that has made this organization so stalwart.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I mean, the medical side of it was super important because we wanted to fight for medical freedom, right? And we saw a big crowd of people, at the Defeat the Mandates rallies across in DC and LA. A lot of people wanted to fight for that medical freedom. We were able to achieve that and, save a lot of jobs, 400,000, maybe 500,000 people. Nobody knows the exact number, but so that really put us on the map. And we realized that, there's a root cause to all these problems going on, and that's a lack of, accountability in the government. That's a lack of integrity. The government needs reformed in some ways so that it reflects, the people that it serves. And there's a lack of ethics in the government right now. Like I was saying before with, the supervisors following orders, they knew it was wrong, but the ethical thing to do is to stand up when you have an unethical order or an unconstitutional order. And, we just want our members and our fellow employees to be free of coercion and almost like it was almost torture. I mean, they were treating people extremely bad, and they were disparately treating people.
And it continues on.
Yeah, it does. And the one thing is, like, we have our EEO complaints, right? And in those complaints that they, mine personally, they acknowledge in certain points that, yeah, I was treated differently from my coworkers, but then they dismissed it and said, well, it's not a covered class or whatever. And so it's like this circle of, the government's discriminating against me, and it's clear discrimination because, when was the last time people were treated like this? Go back to like the civil rights era, maybe. And, people were just treated so wrong. You couldn't go into a restaurant. You couldn't do all this other stuff. I had to show up to work and they wanted me to test. If I didn't test, I had to go home, whatever it might have been. And I just think, then the EEO is involved, and their role is to investigate those claims and to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Yet they dismissed it. And so it's just like the government or EEO is covering for the government. It's just a circle of covering each other's backs. And that's kind of where I feel the corruption comes in. So I don't have any, I think the government and probably the EEO program at one point before all these class complaints started and all these individual complaints started, I feel that they probably at some point worked together to figure out how we can get around this and how we cannot, hold people accountable. I don't have any proof of that, but that's just the way I personally feel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, as a board member, you have heard a lot of stories. What are some of the stories that have popped out in your mind as being really heartbreaking?
Yeah. Well, one is Marcus, what he's going through right now. Yes. Jim's going through his own stuff. Most of the boards at one point been under some kind of retaliation or some kind of action. But I guess one person that hits close to home because it's in my hometown. I don't personally know her in person, but I've had conversations with her. And at one point, I don't know if her story started pre-mandate, if she got the vaccine pre-mandate or if she got it because she was forced. But she ended up getting the shot, and it ended up debilitating her to the point where she couldn't go to work anymore. And there was really nothing she could do. She couldn't work from home. I'm not sure if a remote option was available to her. And if she was, I don't know her full story, but if she was even capable to do remote work. And she filed CA1s, which is, work injury forms. And they kept denying her claims. And so for 8 months to like a year, she was on LWOP, not being paid.
Which is LWOP?
Leave without pay. Yeah, so leave without pay for 8 months to a year, if not longer. And she's not getting income, and she can't work anywhere else because she's injured. And thankfully, not thankfully, but she did reach out to me recently and say that her claim finally did get approved. So that's good news. But
You
she's
mean
still,
they're actually admitting that something might have happened?
yeah, potentially, yeah.
Whoa.
Taking a long time though, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's good news for her. But at the same point, she still can't work, and her life is going to be changed for the rest of her life. And um, it's a uh, sad event.
Brian, we all thank you for those who have benefited from Feds for Freedom. We all thank you for the work that you've put into this organization. If there were one thing that the average American citizen could do to combat the corruption in the country, what would it be?
Yeah, it's get involved. That's the main thing. You have to put some time into this effort. We have within our organization, we have people that just donate, which is great. We have people that volunteer. We have people that do both. Um, Volunteering takes a lot of time, especially if you want to get heavily involved in it. But it's good. It's feel good work. You're gonna feel good once you volunteer and you're fighting for what's right. And a lot of people, I think, um, they just wanted to lay back in the background and not get involved. Um, and I think back to prior to the mandates, if all those people that at my office that were saying that they didn't want to get the shot, if they would have just kind of hopped on the bandwagon with us, and that would have happened all across the United States, that how much different this story could be at this day. And maybe the mandate would have never come down because if, what, 2.5 million federal employees is, I think, what's in the federal workforce. If you had 1 million, 1.5 million employees standing up saying, no, I'm not going to do that, I believe it's wrong, and they stand with their convictions, the government's not going to fire you. The government kept talking about national security. And I think what would happen if 400,000, 500,000 people got fired? You're going to have people that aren't protecting the border, not doing jobs at the airports like we do, all these other important jobs. Now, I understand some people have this idea and this want to limit government, and I respect that. But with our current situation, at the border right now, could you imagine if we had no Border Patrol agents doing anything down there? I mean, the national security would have been far worse than what it is now. But they were telling us that it was a national security threat if I didn't get vaccinated, and it didn't make any sense, and so yeah, just the biggest way is to volunteer, donate, or do both, because it really will help organizations like us and others out there. Some people, even though they were holding out, didn't want to put in an exemption. Like they didn't. That's how much they didn't want to be bothered. And you kind of found yourself like having to keep nudging them, like, hey, you shouldn't be testing at work. They're discriminating against you, and they're like, well, it's all right. And I'm like, no, go file an exemption. They're like, I already did. I'm like, no, not for the vaccine. Go file one for testing. Go file one for masking. Go file as many as you can, because otherwise you're going to be sitting here and you're going to be the only employee that's coming into work sitting down and putting a swab up your nose.
That's right. There's no reason. It's all EUA. It's all illegal to require someone to take it without their consent.
Yeah. And I felt bad. I will say that there's one supervisor at my work that I like most of my supervisors, but there was only one that ever showed any remorse. And he was the one that was put overseeing the testing program. And when he first told me that he was going to start making me test, he kind of pulled me aside and was like, hey, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm a new supervisor. I'm under probation. Like, they put me in charge of it. And I thought it was really unfair to put a new supervisor in charge of that program. I thought that was kind of a low move. But it is what it was, and I've thanked him on the side and said, hey, you know what? You're the only person that's ever showed any kind of remorse for this. And a lot of people just were following orders, and they didn't care how it affected their employees. And you're supposed to be family, and you weren't treated like that.
So did you have much family support when fighting the government?
Yeah, for the most part, I did. My family was pretty supportive. My mom is a donor of the organization. She's fully supports me from the beginning. Actually, she told me the other day when I was back home, she's like, I'm never getting another vaccine. And so I thought that was, interesting. But at one point, at the height of all this COVID stuff, um, I had not an immediate family member, but a distant family member, actually tell me that she would wish that I get fired for my job. And it was really eye-opening to how people could be manipulated to treat even their own family members out of that fear that the government and the media is just pouring into their brains. And so it really took me back, and it just how evil people could be in such a dark time. Like the world just got really dark, and even your family wasn't, or your family could go against you. So.
I wonder how many people are actually never going to get another shot for the rest of their life. We're not talking just COVID, childhood vaccines, just the older people shots.
Well, I think the faith in institutions, from the government, from the medical institutions, from the news, all that stuff. I mean, me personally, I have no faith in any of them anymore, and I will never trust them again. And I will question everything that they do. And I think what we're seeing now is not a total rejection of vaccines, at least the COVID one, but I don't know. Are they even getting 10% of the people vaccinated with their boosters anymore? I don't even think they are.
Less than 10%.
Yeah, I just saw the other day Moderna's stocks were just tanking, and the only product that I think that they make, that they create themselves, is that COVID shot, and it doesn't even work. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really hard. Like I was telling somebody the other day, like I want to go just get a regular checkup in my hometown, but I don't know who to go to, because I don't want to go to some doctor that doesn't care about me anymore, that doesn't want to do what's right for me, and not just, what I can push that big pharma is telling me to push to keep me as a patient. No, like if I'm need treatment with something, I want you to heal me, not just keep me as a patient, and so I don't know where to start. Maybe I could talk to Doc Ruddy, and maybe she's got a network of doctors somewhere, and she could point me to the right direction. But when I got COVID the first time, I didn't go to the hospital. I went on to it was like a website called ecarehealth.net or something like that, and I went and I got a virtual appointment with a nurse practitioner that was like in another state somewhere. And I told her my symptoms, and I was like, I think I have COVID, and she, about a half hour of us on the call giving her our symptoms, and then we did like a half-hour course on ivermectin, and then she prescribed us ivermectin. And the first time I got it, I used it. I was about 3 days into me being sick, so it didn't work right away, but it worked pretty quick, taking most of my symptoms away. And then the second time I thought I was getting COVID. At least I felt. I was at work one day, and I got them body aches, and the body aches were the worst things about when I got sick the first time. It wasn't about the temperature. I was fine. But I took an ivermectin as soon as I got home, and I woke up the next morning, and I was like perfectly fine. I didn't feel sick anymore. And, you have this drug that can do wonders, right? And all of a sudden, they're banning it. Like the governor in Michigan is banning her doctors in her state from issuing this medicine. And, you can't even go to a doctor and get it prescribed in person. And it was, you could have saved so many lives with it potentially. And I think we're seeing that is the case now. And even if I do recall back in like 2020, prior to the mandates coming out, there was 3 studies in like Qatar, Israel, and the Cleveland Clinic that were showing like extremely good efficacy rates with ivermectin. So it was known before that shot was given an EUA that there was a drug out there that could help people. Yes. And instead, the government and these pharmaceutical companies went the corrupt way, and they were worried about money and stocks and all this other stuff. And they said, well, we're going to ban this medicine because we need to get an EUA on it. And the only way that they can get an EUA is if there's no other alternate therapeutics. And that was the route that they chose. And that was clearly the evil, wrong route. So,
well, thanks so much for coming on, Brian. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me.